The Supreme Court now is considering a landmark case to block sex change and hormones for children. What they're calling it is gender affirming care, but we know better. The case was argued before the holidays in 2024, but the court hasn't decided yet, and we are waiting. Miriam Grossman is a physician who's been speaking out against gender madness for over a decade. Her latest book, I Want to Tell You, brings the receipts. It's a comprehensive look at the experimental and dangerous procedures that are being pushed on children. So she is the right person to talk to. It's called Lost in Transnation. I absolutely recommend it. I read it over the holidays and was floored, even though I think that I'm well studied on this. There's so much to learn. So welcome, Dr. Grossman, for the first time to Redacted. Thank you so much for your time.
I'm thrilled to be here, Natali. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Now, before I ask you about the Supreme Court case, I want to say that after reading your trans book, I rushed to find your 2009 book because I had not previously been aware of it. And you mentioned it in your book. It's called You're Teaching My Child What? A Physician Exposes the List of Sex Education and How They Harm Your Children. I want our viewers to know about this book, too, because I'm quite sure it's been suppressed. It is shocking. She lays out what they're teaching our children in sex education, what they're leaving out, how it is an evolution of the research of perverts. So I want everyone to stick around for that because I'm floored by it. And so I have so many questions for you. But first, let's go ahead and go to the Supreme Court case. What can you tell me about this case and what is at risk?
Okay, well, this is a very important case. It involves the state of Tennessee, which passed legislation to make it illegal to provide minors with medical and surgical gender so-called treatments or interventions. So puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, estrogen for boys, testosterone for girls, and surgeries, breast amputations, genital surgeries, etc. So the state of Tennessee passed legislation saying that that would be no longer permitted in their state. And they are one of 25 states that currently have this sort of legislation. So a number of parents in Tennessee, as well as the United States Justice Department, decided to challenge Tennessee and take them to court over that legislation. So it now is in front of the court. The oral arguments were heard a few weeks ago in December, and I listened to the entire thing. And I have to tell you, Natali, I was just about ready to throw things at the screen as I was listening. I have to tell you the ignorance of, and I'll mention these justices, Jackson and Sotomayor, their profound ignorance of science, which we already knew that Justice Jackson had said during her confirmation hearings that she can't define what a woman is. But, so it shouldn't come as any surprise. But it just really astonished me, the comments and questions that these justices were asking. For example, they were assuming that a girl can go through male puberty, that it's just, that we are like, I don't know, like Lego pieces, and we can just reassemble the human body. And it's
but
not
where do you think they get that from? The science shows, as you point out in your book, that your sex chromosomes are imprinted on every 70 trillion cells in your body. So are they just saying this wishfully? Why would they say something so stupid?
Well, forgive me. I think they are stupid.
Okay.
I just think they
That's
are.
the simplest explanation, right? That's all we can go with.
I mean, they're also totally brainwashed and just regurgitating the arguments from the other side of the, the proponents of this ideology. And it is an ideology. It is not based in medicine. It is not based in science. So I think they are just regurgitating what they've been told. They are not looking at the other, the arguments that are being presented. For example, on this case in the Supreme Court, there's something like 40 briefs, amici briefs, that have been submitted by doctors' groups and other groups, feminist groups, all sorts of people that really do a great job of explaining why giving kids these medical interventions is dangerous and has no basis in the research. It doesn't help them. It doesn't even help them.
Well, in fact, wasn't it Supreme Court Justice Roberts who pointed out that the suicide rate remains the same or higher with gender affirming care, even if you allow someone to totally transition? So there is somebody who did the homework.
Yes, absolutely. And Justice Alito also was very, very good. And Justice Thomas didn't say very much, but what he did say was excellent. So, there is some hope. We don't know what the bottom line, what the vote's going to be. We won't know until June. But you had asked me earlier, what's on the line? So what's on the line with the Supreme Court case is whether or not states will be able to step in and say, look, there is no evidence that these treatments, so-called treatments, are helping these emotionally disturbed kids. There's no evidence of it, but there is evidence of long-standing harm. We are, in many cases, Natali, sterilizing these children. We are sterilizing them. They will not be able to have biological children. And it is criminal to do that. These kids are young. They have emotional issues. And in no way can they give any sort of informed consent regarding their fertility, regarding their future sexual functioning, which will also in many cases be compromised. We can't do that. We can't, a 12 or 15-year-old, or even I would say, even an 18-year-old, I would say, cannot give fully informed consent about those issues. Many people will not recognize that they wish to have biological children until they are in their mid-20s or later. So
right.
These are big issues.
And in the WPATH documents, we saw that these doctors know that. They pretend that they're explaining it to the children, but the doctors themselves said it's like talking to a brick wall because they're children. So this should have been the end of this conversation, but unfortunately it wasn't when the WPATH documents were released.
Well, look, it is a huge medical scandal, one of the biggest in the history of medicine. And I wrote my book in order to educate parents. The book, Lost in Trans Nation. It is not, you don't need a PhD, you don't need to be a medical doctor to read this book. It's for regular moms and dads. You know that, you read it. Now, every family needs to know that you're not immune. You know, even if you don't send your child to a public school, a government school, even if you're a family of faith and you go to church and you are strong believers, that is not
especially that. Actually, the story you tell, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I really want our viewers to know this, because you tell a story about a man who lost custody of his child and was specifically targeted because of his Christian faith. I think it was Iowa or Idaho. And they said, don't bring up Jesus, don't bring up that you go to church, because that puts a target on your back. So people of faith are automatically associated with bigots. You printed the social service report that showed that he's been marked down as, I think it was abusive or harassive or something like that. Yeah. That's wild that people of faith would be more targeted as abusive parents when the studies show that they're, in fact, the most engaged.
Well, look, this is a war on Judeo-Christian values. It is part of a great war against those of us who have Judeo-Christian faith and values. So yes, you're correct. I did tell the story of this just heartbreaking situation of a man who lost custody of his daughter. But before he lost custody, he was specifically told, as I know other parents have been told by Child Protective Services, not to take your child to church, not to mention God, Jesus, the Bible, what have you, with your child, which is a direct, oh, I'm sorry.
Violation of our freedom of religion.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can think of a lot of direct violations that is. Yeah.
Yes,
it's a targeting of people for their religion.
Parents have a constitutional right to direct the upbringing of their children. And this is being attacked. So I give parents in my book the understanding and the tools with which to fight this and to prevent this from happening in their families.
Yes, it's fantastic, actually. It's really written for families, whereas some of the other gender ideology books may not be. It's very targeted, something that I spoke to my kids about. You say never speak to Child Protective Services without a lawyer, because you never know. They could be someone who is some kind of ideologue who has an agenda that can remove your children from you. So even if it's not about gender ideology, if they show up at your door, get a lawyer. So thank you for that. That's a fantastic tip, right?
Yes, and you do not have to speak to them. They show up, knock on your door. You're not obligated to speak with them. If they have the police with them, that may be a different matter. But the point is that I have an appendix in my book written by attorneys who specialize in this area of parental rights. And that appendix, which is one of just 5 appendices, explains what you need to do before that knock on the door. You need to know this stuff before it happens. So I'm very grateful to the brilliant lawyers that provided me with that information. There's another appendix on how to deal with schools. Parents have to understand our schools are unfortunately filled with activists, social warriors, and they believe that they will be saving your child from you if your child comes out with some sort of new gender identity and they're not comfortable with it at home. These teachers and principals and guidance counselors and social workers, they think they're going to save your child from you. So you need to get educated and understand this.
That's terrifying. I want to share just one more bit from your book. You spoke of a woman who posted on social media that she was grateful her child had detransitioned, and she got a knock on her door from Child Protective Services. Thankfully, that person who worked for Child Protective Services was not an ideologue and said, "Oh, this is wrong. You should be able to do this. You should report that person." So really, it's the luck of the draw. You're throwing the dice rather at who you're going to get. Now, I want to circle back to the point you just made about how public schools are filled with activists who want to, I don't want to use I think groom is too simplistic of a word, but you've been talking about this for over a decade in your book, You're Teaching My Child What? And you point out how they want children to be totally promiscuous. They think that you can mitigate the risk with condoms and abortions and you'll never get attached. And they don't tell children the whole story, which is you will get attached, you can get diseases, you can lower your risk of any kind of mental anxiety by practicing safer sex. But they refuse to tell you this, even though there's copious amounts of data. Now, maybe 5 years ago, I would have thought that was a religious type of message. Your book points out it's absolutely not. We have the data to show that practicing a more conservative sex life will actually make you happier and healthier, and that some of these practices that are promoted by activists are quite dangerous. I feel very betrayed by the fact that it took me this long to learn this from your book. So can you give us maybe a little bit of a synopsis of this?
Yes, of course, Natalie. And I think that your feelings of betrayal are sadly very legitimate. And many, many parents feel that way, and they should feel that way because the medical organizations and the mental health organizations have utterly failed us and
Yeah,
failed
and I
parents.
feel betrayed not just on behalf as a parent, but as somebody who came up in the Sex and the City generation. That nobody was loud enough to say, actually, this is a dangerous lifestyle. And I have a master's degree in sociology from a Research One university where sex and gender were promoted as enlightenment, and I feel lied to by all of it on behalf of myself too, as
Okay,
a former young person.
so what you need to understand, what parents need to understand, and as I explained in that other book that you mentioned, You're Teaching My Child What, which was written in 2009, is that you see, sex education is not about health. It is about freedom. It's about sexual freedom. It's based on an ideology that says we are sexual creatures from cradle to grave, and we have the right at any age to express and explore our sexuality. Now, all of that can sound sort of good until you realize that what they're doing is teaching, elementary school children about anal sex, about, about masturbation, about, all sorts of various sexual ways of expressing yourself sexually. And they're also teaching kids that no one has the right to tell you when you are ready for this. Okay,
Right,
only
that's
you know.
wild.
Yeah,
With a
only you
checklist
know.
online. Check, are you ready to start having sex? Oh, you're 13? Go ahead, be safe, use a condom, it's all good. While
Not only that,
omitting the actual data that shows how ineffective a condom can be at preventing STDs and how young people are. In fact, you have this amazing graph of the cervix, how young people are more at risk for cervical disease because of their anatomy. Why
yes.
are we not told this?
Yes. Well, this is a fundamental, we've known this in medicine for a long, very decades, that young girls who become sexually active at a young age are much more likely to have cervical infections, and those infections lead to cervical cancer. So, the number one risk for cervical cancer, which is due to the HPV virus, and we can talk about the vaccines another time, but the risk factors are early initiation of sexual behavior and multiple partners. Now, when you start having sex when you're 12 or 14, you are more likely to have multiple sexual partners in your life. And the cervix, before adulthood, the cervix, as I explain in the book, is more fragile and vulnerable and easily infected with all sorts of viruses and bacteria. So no, this is not about religion. This is not about the Bible. This is not about, morality. Although all those things also, could come in at another point. But this is about hard science. This is about
Yeah.
things that you see under the microscope. And so telling young people, especially girls, because there is a difference between girls and boys, telling them to delay sexual behavior as long as possible. And then, if possible, picking a lifelong partner who also delayed their sexual behavior will give you the highest chance of never having to worry about an STD. It's just,
Right.
these are medical facts.
And these are suppressed medical facts. In fact, about 3 years ago, I read a book that talked about how abortion increases risk of breast cancer by many orders of magnitude. And I thought, where was that? Why is that not a conversation around abortion right now, which is such a hot button topic for Democrats? They want it so badly, but This research exists, right? Why are they not discussing it?
Well, it certainly does exist. What also exists and is very easily discovered is that both women and men have, in high proportion, following an abortion, have lifelong feelings of sadness, regret, and guilt. Okay, it is not just a matter of getting your tooth pulled, something that you forget about the next day. And for this, I point the finger at the American Psychiatric Association, and many other associations that simply squash that research. And I discovered this when I was working, seeing UCLA students in the counseling center there. I worked there for 12 years. And I discovered that many young people who are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, because they were graduate students and so on, they carry with them tremendous sadness over what happened, over their abortions. This is a life-changing event for many people. I'm not saying it is for every single person, but this needs to be acknowledged. This is a truth that has been squashed for political reasons by the medical and mental health associations. And right. I want to underscore, I'm including men, not just women, yes. Men as well.
Yes. I mean, I could go on and on for a long time, but I want to be respectful of your time. So I'm just going to, the true risk of anal sex you talk about, the true risk of having a promiscuous life and how it affects your mental health, when the activists say just the opposite. The risk of what you call conversion therapy and not talking to people who maybe want to direct their sexual lifestyle. That was shocking to me. So instead of taking up all of your time and reviewing your book, I'm going to really suggest everybody read You're Teaching My Child What by Dr. Miriam Grossman and Lost in Transnation. Either order, there it goes, works just fine. But for me, like I said, I read the trans book and then I said, what's this? I need to know about this. So I'm glad it was placed in my life when I have adolescents. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your book. I hope we get to talk again. It was a pleasure to meet you finally.
Thank you, Natali. Could I say one more thing?
Yes,
I want
absolutely.
people to know about my website, which is miriamgrossmanmd.com. And you can learn so much. You can hear me testifying in the House of Representatives last year on the transgender issue and many other things. In addition, my book on the transgender issue is also available as an audio book, and I did the narration. People absolutely love it. So you don't have to sit and read this 300-page book. You can get it in audio. And I want to thank you very much, Natali.
My pleasure. Also, you're a great voice on X. It's Miriam _Grossman. So please come back on Redacted anytime.
Thank you, Natali.